Every
I have
Sunday
something
since
important to
Cecily
say.
Sterling turned 17, her Aunt Prudence read the marriage announcements aloud by
I
the
know,
cold parlor
Prudence.
fire, and every Sunday she closed the newspaper the same way. "No one is coming for you, Cecily. You had best make your peace with that." Cecily had stopped flinching at the words some 4 years ago. She collected the tea tray instead, the china rattling faintly against her palms, and said nothing because saying nothing was the only answer that had never yet cost her anything. The parlor smelled of cold wax and lavender water. The clock on the mantel ran 2 minutes slow, and had for as long as Cecily could remember, and nobody had ever troubled to correct it. She smoothed the mended seam at her cuff, a habit her fingers found without asking her mind's permission. Outside, the fen wind pressed at the shutters in long, patient gusts, the sound Cecily had fallen asleep to every night of her life since her father's death, familiar enough that she had long since stopped hearing it as anything but silence wearing a different coat. The fire had burned low enough that its light no longer reached the far corner of the room, where her father's old writing desk sat unused, its drawers kept locked by a key she had never once been offered.
Think of the family.
A carriage stopped outside. Not the vicar's gig, too fine for that, and far too late for any caller with honest
His Grace
business.
the Duke of Harwick.
Are we expecting anyone, Aunt?
Prudence Sterling's needle paused over her embroidery for a single stitch before resuming, a small betrayal Cecily had learned to read as fluently as handwriting. "We are expecting no one," Prudence said. "Whoever it is has mistaken the house." The knock came anyway. 3 measured raps, the kind a man gives a door he intends to have opened. Prudence rose faster than her usual stiff, deliberate pace and reached the hall before the housemaid could. Cecily heard a man's voice, low and unfamiliar, and her aunt's voice pitched a full register higher than its ordinary chill. "His Grace the Duke of Harwick," the housemaid announced, a full beat after the man had already crossed the threshold behind her, as if the title had needed time to catch up with its own owner. Cecily had never in her life had occasion to curtsy to a duke and found her body knew the motion regardless, some old instructions surfacing without her leave.
"Forgive the hour, Mrs. Sterling. I would not have called uninvited if the matter admitted of waiting."
He was tall, dark-coated, travel-worn in a way that suggested he had come some distance without pausing to make himself presentable for it. He held a slim leather ledger against his chest, the way another man might carry a pistol he hoped not to need. Prudence's smile arrived a half-second late and did not reach past her mouth. "Your Grace does us great honor," she said, "though I confess I cannot imagine what business could bring you to so humble a house at such an hour."
"I am closing out my late father's trading accounts. Wool and cloth, mostly a partnership he kept with a Mr. Edmund Sterling of this parish some years before his death. The ledger will not balance until I account for a series of payments made to a Miss C. Sterling, and no receipt was ever returned confirming they arrived."
Cecily's breath caught somewhere behind her collarbone. Her father's name spoken aloud in this cold room sounded like a door creaking open onto a passage she had not known the house possessed.
My father had a partner in trade. I was never told of any such arrangement.
Prudence's needle went altogether still this time. "Edmund's affairs were settled long before you had any need to trouble yourself with them," Prudence said too fast, the words arriving ahead of any thought that might have shaped them with more care. "Whatever accounts his Grace is chasing, they concern the dead, not the living. I'm sure the Duke's man of business can be satisfied by correspondence, and need not trouble this house again." Simon made no move toward the door she had all but pointed him to.
"The payments in question were annual, Mrs. Sterling, and continued some years past your husband's own passing, which I understand predates your late brother-in-law's. Someone in this household has been receiving them. I should like very much to know it was the person to whom they were owed."
Cecily looked between the two of them, the Duke's patient, unhurried stillness and her aunt's brittle, over-quick composure, and felt the shape of something she could not yet name settling cold in her stomach.
Aunt, what payments?
Prudence's mouth thinned to a line Cecily recognized from 100 smaller arguments, the expression that meant a subject was closed whether or not it had been answered. "There is nothing to discuss," Prudence said. This family has kept you fed and clothed on charity these 8 years, Cecily, out of duty and nothing more. I will not have a stranger stand in my parlor and imply otherwise. The word charity landed differently than it ever had before. Cecily had swallowed that word 1,000 times without tasting it. Tonight it sat wrong in her throat, sharp-edged as though it had never quite been true.
I have no wish to imply anything, madam, only to close an account without deceit. If I might see whatever correspondence or papers Mr. Sterling left behind regarding the arrangement, I would trouble you no further tonight.
There was a fire in the old barn, Prudence said. 6 years passed. Whatever papers Edmund kept were lost in it, along with a good deal else. I am sorry His Grace has come so far for nothing. Simon's expression did not change, but Cecily, watching him rather than her aunt, saw something shift behind his eyes, a private calculation completing itself and not liking its own answer.
A fire 6 years past, I see.
He said nothing of the receipt already in his own ledger, the last one Edmund Sterling had ever signed, which bore a date 2 full years after the fire Prudence had just described. He only closed the ledger against his chest and inclined his head with a courtesy that cost him nothing and revealed nothing either.
Then I will not keep you from your evening further. I intend to remain in the district a few days yet, settling other accounts of my father's. Perhaps the parish register might hold some record the fire did not reach.
He looked, for the first time, directly at Cecily rather than past her.
Miss Sterling, I'm sorry to have disturbed your Sunday.
He left before Cecily could answer, and the door closed behind him with a click that seemed absurdly louder than the knock had been. Prudence returned to her embroidery as though nothing at all had passed through the room. Cecily stood holding the tea tray she had forgotten she was carrying, watching the dregs go cold, and thought, for the first time in 8 years, that her aunt might have been lying to her about something larger than the hour of supper. Sleep proved difficult to find that night. Cecily lay listening to the house settle around her, and turned over, for perhaps the 100th time in her life, every small strangeness she had trained herself not to examine. The locked drawer in her uncle's old desk that Josiah alone kept the key to. The way accounts were always discussed behind closed doors and never before her. The charity that had never once, in 8 years, felt like anyone's choice but a burden endured. By morning she had decided nothing, except that she wanted to see the Duke of Harwick's ledger with her own eyes. And that wanting a thing for herself, rather than accepting what was given her, felt like a language she had forgotten she once spoke fluently, as a much younger girl, in a house that had not yet taught her to be quiet. Josiah joined her at breakfast before she had finished the thought, buttering toast with the easy, unhurried manner of a man who suspected nothing. "A duke in our own parlor," he said, almost fond. "Mother says he has come about some old confusion of your father's. Nothing that need concern you, Cecily. These things always sort themselves out, given time and the right people to manage them."
And who are the right people, Josiah, if not me?
He looked up at that, a flicker of something crossing his face too quickly for her to name it. Gone before she could be certain she had seen it at all. "Your aunt and I have always managed the family's affairs," he said. "It has never wanted for careful hands. You need not trouble yourself with figures and ledgers. It is not a burden anyone expects a young woman to carry alone." Cecily said nothing further, only watched him finish his toast with the same unhurried ease, and found she was cataloguing, for the first time, every small kindness he had ever offered her as something that might have had a price attached she had never once been shown. The Duke of Harwick returned 2 mornings later, this time to the churchyard rather than the parlor, where Cecily had gone to lay fresh holly on her father's grave and found him already there, hat in hand, reading the weathered stone as though it might answer the question his ledger could not.
I had no wish to intrude on you here.
You could not have known I would come, nor could I have guessed you would. I suppose that makes us equally guilty of intruding on each other.
It was the first thing she had said to him that was not an echo of her aunt's permission, and it surprised her more than it seemed to surprise him.
The new vicar tells me the parish kept its own duplicate registers of any sums administered through the church, separate from whatever a family might keep at home. marriages, burials, and certain trusts and pensions besides. It occurred to me a barn fire in Mrs. Sterling's yard would hardly have reached a strongbox in the vestry.
You suspect my aunt of lying to you.
I suspect the fire is inconvenient in its timing. I have learned in closing my father's accounts this past year that inconvenient timing is rarely accidental.
Cecily looked down at the holly in her gloved hands, its leaves already browning at the edges from the morning frost, and thought of 8 years of Sundays and the word charity sitting wrong in her mouth.
My father never spoke of any partnership with your family. His name meant nothing beyond this churchyard to me. Not until you said it in my aunt's parlor.
I have no wish to unsettle you, Miss Sterling.
And yet you have? I find I would rather be unsettled with the truth than settled on whatever my aunt has decided I ought to believe.
Something in his face eased a little at that. Some guard he had been keeping since the parlor door closed on him 2 nights past.
Then perhaps you would consent to walk with me to the vestry. Whatever the register holds, I think you have as
feel
much
certain
right to see it as
it's
I
time.
do, and rather more right than I do to whatever it proves.
They found the successor vicar, a careful young man named Reverend Yates, bent over a chest of old ledgers in the cold vestry, and Cecily watched Simon's patient, unhurried questions coax out what her aunt's brittle refusals never would. The register was there. 8 entries, one for every year since her father's death, each recording a sum received by the church on behalf of Miss C. Sterling minor, and passed into the keeping of her guardian, one Mrs. Prudence Sterling, against receipt. Cecily read her own name in a dead vicar's careful copperplate hand, and felt the floor of her whole life tilt slightly beneath her. The way a familiar room looks different once you have learned a door in it was never locked at all, only told you it was. Reverend Yates cleared his throat. There is one entry more recent than the rest, he said, turning a page. My predecessor's own hand, the last thing he wrote in this register before his death. He notes he witnessed the final sum delivered in person, not to Mrs. Sterling, but to a Mr. Josiah Sterling who signed for it in his own name rather than his mother's. Cecily had not known, until that instant, how much she had still been hoping this was all some ordinary confusion, easily resolved, easily forgiven. Her cousin's name in that register, in his own hand, closed that hope as neatly as a door.
Josiah told me, not 2 years past, that the family's savings were all but exhausted keeping this house.
The sum recorded here for that same year was not small, Miss Sterling. Whatever became of it, it did not vanish keeping this house fed.
If you have ever discovered that a story you were told your whole life to explain your own smallness was never true at all, you will know something of what Cecily felt standing in that cold vestry. Tell me in the comments if you have carried a version of yourself that turned out to be someone else's convenient lie. The days that followed unfolded carefully, out of Prudence's sight. Cecily kept the household keys, as she always had, and found, for the first time, a use for that small trust her aunt had never thought to withhold from her. 3 evenings running, once the house had settled into sleep, she let Simon in through the garden door to the cramped estate room where the family's private ledgers were kept. The first evening yielded little beyond aching eyes and a great many household accounts that balanced, just as they ought, and Cecily found herself, past midnight, more curious about the man across the narrow table than about the figures between them.
You have asked me nothing at all about myself in 3 evenings, Your Grace only about ledgers.
It seemed no place of mine to ask. A stranger arrives in your parlor and unsettles a house you have lived quietly in for 8 years. I thought you had earned the right to volunteer whatever you cared to rather than answer for it.
She found, turning that answer over, that it was the first courtesy anyone in this house had extended her in longer than she cared to count, the simple respect of being left to choose her own disclosures.
My father taught me my letters himself, before he died. Little of him remains to me beyond that, and the smell of pipe tobacco and a green coat he wore to church. I have wondered, since Tuesday, whether he ever meant for me to have more than memory of him.
Every entry in this ledger says he did. A man does not trouble himself with annual sums for a daughter he does not think of.
Cecily let the answer wait, and the candle burned a good half-inch lower before either of them found anything more to say, though neither seemed in any particular hurry to break the silence. They worked by a single candle the following evening, the light too dear to waste on more. Bent close over columns of figures at a table built for one person's correspondence rather than two people's scrutiny. Cecily's shoulder found itself, more than once, a bare inch from his, and neither of them moved to correct the distance.
Your cousin is a careful man. These entries balance beautifully on their surface.
But not beneath it.
Not beneath it. Here, this sum marked as household expenditure in the autumn of your father's 5th year gone. It corresponds almost exactly to a purchase of shares in the Fen Market and Eastern Railway, recorded under another name altogether in a newspaper notice from that same month. I recognized the amount before I recognized the coincidence.
Cecily stared at the two figures, hers and his, laid side by side on the table between them, and understood with sudden dizzying clarity that her cousin had not merely withheld her inheritance. He had planted it and let it grow in his own name, while telling her there was nothing left to give.
He told me there was nothing. For 8 years, he told me there was nothing.
There was never nothing, Miss Sterling. There was only never you.
He offered the words no softening at all, and Cecily heard something beneath their bluntness that surprised her.
You speak of this as though it were a familiar wrong to you, not only a stranger's misfortune.
My own father spent his last years believing every partner he had trusted in trade had cheated him outright, when in truth most of them had never once troubled to write him the truth. I inherited his ledgers and his suspicion of every unexplained figure in them both. I wish to spare your father's name that same silence, the one that fell over so many of his own partners.
Cecily had not expected the confession, and found it changed, slightly, the shape of what she had assumed about a duke's sudden interest in a dead tradesman's daughter. The candle guttered low between them, and for a moment neither reached to trim it, both still enough that the only sound in the room was the paper settling under Cecily's fingers and her own unsteady breath. The estate room door opened without warning, and Josiah Sterling stood in it, still in his coat, the candlelight from the garden path plain to see before either of them heard his step. "Get away from that ledger," Josiah said, and crossed the room faster than his own bulk should have allowed, reaching for the book still open beneath Simon's hand. Simon kept his grip. The two men grappled for the ledger itself. No measured blows, only the graceless, desperate pull of two hands refusing to let go of the same object, a chair overturned between them. The candle knocked flat and nearly extinguished before Cecily caught it upright with her bare palm, hot wax scalding her fingers before she could set it right. Josiah drove Simon back against the shelf of old estate books hard enough to send a whole row of them sliding to the floor, and for one raw instant Cecily saw not a duke and a careful cousin but two ordinary men, breathing hard, neither willing to be the one who let go first. Simon's coat tore at the shoulder seam. He seemed past noticing.
Josiah, stop this. Stop it now.
Her voice alone could not stop him. Only Simon finally wrenching the ledger free stopped him. And then Simon stepped back against the wall, breathing hard, the book held against his chest just as he had carried it into Prudence's parlor 2 evenings before, as though he had known even then what it might someday cost him to keep hold of it. Cecily put her own body between her cousin and the door before he could think to bar it. Her back flat against the wood, her heart beating so hard she could feel it in her throat.
If you touch that book again, I will scream this house awake, and you may explain to every servant in it why a duke is bleeding from the lip in your estate room at midnight.
Josiah's chest heaved once, twice, and something in his face went from fury to a colder, more calculating fear, the look of a man doing sums of his own, weighing what could still be salvaged against what was already lost. "You do not understand what you are meddling in," he said, low, almost pleading now. "It was never meant to be theft, Cecily. It was an investment. I meant to give it back to you, in time with interest, when you were of an age to manage it properly."
I have been of age to manage my own affairs for 4 years, Josiah. You never once intended to tell me I had any.
He had no answer to that, and the silence that followed said more than any answer could have. Prudence arrived at the sound of the overturned chair, candle in hand, and took in the scene with the swift, practiced calm of a woman accustomed to smoothing over what could not be undone. "This is a family matter," she said. "It requires no strangers and no scenes. Your Grace, I must ask you to leave my house, and I must ask my niece to remember whose roof has sheltered her these 8 years." She turned to Cecily with something harder than her usual coldness now, a warning dressed as concern. "I have already spoken with Reverend Yates about a match," Prudence said. "Widower Halloway of the next parish. A respectable man and one of a quiet wife for his children. The banns can be read within the fortnight, and this whole unpleasant business need trouble no one further." Cecily understood, all at once, what her aunt intended. Married and removed to another parish within a fortnight, she would be beyond easy reach of any magistrate, any inquiry, any voice but her husband's, before the ledger's contents could ever be tested in daylight.
You would marry me off in a fortnight to bury this.
"I would see you settled," Prudence said, "as I have always intended to see you settled." Simon stepped forward then, the ledger still held fast against his chest, and there was nothing courteous left in his voice at all.
Miss Sterling will not be settled anywhere. Mrs. Sterling, until this house has answered honestly for 8 years of a dead man's money. I will not stand by and watch a fortnight's haste bury what belongs by every register I have found to her alone.
Prudence's composure cracked at last, a hairline fracture in the porcelain surface she had worn for 8 years, and beneath it Cecily saw, for the first time, something that looked almost like fear. The following morning, Simon rode to the neighboring parish to lay the whole matter before Mr. Holloway. The district's land agent and sitting magistrate, a spare, unhurried man who listened to the account of railway shares and parish registers with the particular patience of someone who had heard family quarrels dressed up as tragedy many times before and had learned to wait for the paper rather than the passion. Holloway sent word within the day that he would call at the Sterling house that evening, and that Josiah Sterling would do well to have his account books ready for honest inspection. The parlor that evening held more people than it had in years. Holloway seated with his own clerk and a satchel of papers, Reverend Yates standing near the door with the parish register itself. Prudence rigid on the settee, Josiah pale beside her, and Simon standing near the cold hearth with his father's ledger still in hand, as though he had not set it down since the estate room. Josiah made one final attempt, his voice thin with the effort of sounding certain. "His Grace's ledger is a private trading account," Josiah said. "It proves a sum was sent. It does not prove what became of it after, nor does it belong in a magistrate's hands at all." Reverend Yates stepped forward and opened the parish register to the page already marked with a slip of ribbon. "It does not need to," Yates said, low and even. "My predecessor's own hand records the sum delivered into your keeping, in your own name, witnessed by himself as vicar of this parish. That record was never kept in this house, Mr. Sterling. It could not have burned in your mother's barn, and it cannot now be argued away in her parlor." Josiah's mouth opened and closed once, and found nothing left to say that the room had not already disproven. It was Cecily who spoke into the silence that followed, and her voice, when it came, did not shake at all.
I want no vengeance, Josiah. I want little enough of an apology either, because I doubt you know how to give one in good faith. I want the accounting in full, before this magistrate, of every pound my father left me, and I want it entered under my own name in my own hand from this evening forward. 8 years is long enough to have waited for something that was always mine to begin with.
The line landed in the quiet parlor the way her father's name had landed 2 nights before, small and plain and beyond answering. Holloway's clerk returned from the railway company's own offices on the 4th day of the inquiry with a bound transfer record that named Josiah Sterling as sole holder of the shares in question. His signature plain beside the date, no ambiguity left for anyone to argue away. Holloway laid the record before Josiah in the same parlor where the whole matter had begun, and did not raise his voice at all. "You may explain this to me now, Mr. Sterling," Holloway said, "in a private accounting, or you may explain it later to a magistrate's bench in the county town, before witnesses who owe your family no particular courtesy. I would strongly counsel the former." Josiah's careful composure, cultivated over 8 years of unchallenged management, did not survive the choice put so plainly before him. He gave the full accounting that same afternoon in a voice gone flat and toneless, listing sums and dates he had hoped, by every sign of him, never to speak aloud to anyone. Holloway's inquiry, once begun in earnest, took the better part of a week to complete, but its conclusion, when it came, was not in doubt. The railway shares, traced through Josiah's own careless paper trail, amounted to a sum considerably larger than the original pension, grown fat on 8 years of dividends never claimed by the woman in whose name they should have stood. Josiah surrendered the administration of the estate entirely. Prudence, stripped of the authority she had wielded over her niece's finances for a decade, found herself, for the first time in Cecily's memory, without an answer for anything at all. Cecily found Simon alone in the garden the evening the inquiry closed, sitting on the low wall where the estate room's candlelight used to fall, his torn coat mended now, but the tear still visible under close inspection.
You did not have to stay through all of it. The magistrate's questions, my cousin's excuses, my aunt's silences, none of it belonged to you to finish.
I made it my fight the moment I read your name in my father's ledger. I do not regret the choosing, only that it took 8 years for anyone to make it.
Cecily sat beside him on the cold stone, close enough that their sleeves touched, and found she minded the evening chill far less than she once had.
I keep waiting to feel triumphant. Instead, I mostly feel tired, and a little afraid of what an empty Sunday will feel like now that no one is left to tell me what to believe about myself.
Then fill it with something true instead, one Sunday at a time, and see what is left standing when the habit of listening to her wears off.
No proposal had been made yet. Only 2 people sitting quietly in a cold garden. But Cecily found it was the first piece of advice in 8 years she wanted to keep. Cecily asked Simon to wait before he saw her settled anywhere, though the offer came quietly, within days of the inquiry's close. She told him a little time to learn the shape of a life that was actually her own before she agreed to share it with anyone, however gently he asked. He let the matter rest there, and she found, turning the fact over privately in the weeks that followed, that his patience told her more about him than any declaration could have. Widower Holloway called once more that same fortnight, hat in hand, hopeful in the mild, unhurried way of a man who had heard some unpleasantness had passed, and assumed the original arrangement still stood. Cecily received him in the parlor herself, poured the tea herself, and told him outright, without unkindness, that she had only just begun learning to keep her own accounts and had no present wish to hand them to any husband, however respectable, before she had finished the lesson. He took the refusal with better grace than she had expected, and did not call again, and Cecily found, watching his carriage go, that refusing a settled, sensible thing for an unsettled, unwritten one felt less like recklessness than she had always been taught it would. Months passed before he asked again, in the same churchyard where they had first spoken honestly to one another, holly long since given way to the first green of spring at her father's grave.
I came to this parish to close an account, Miss Sterling. I find I have no wish to close this one.
A month ago, I would have told you I had never learned how to want anything for myself at all, only how to accept what I was given and be grateful for it. I'm not certain I'm finished learning the difference. I doubt I ever will be finished.
I'm not asking you to finish learning it before you answer me. I'm asking whether you might allow me to learn it alongside you, at whatever pace you set, rather than the pace anyone else has ever set for you.
Cecily looked at him a long moment, weighing the offer the way she had learned, these past weeks, to weigh every account laid before her, in good faith and without haste.
You came to close a ledger, Your Grace? I doubt either of us expected the ledger to open quite so much else.
She looked down at the small leather book he held out to her now. Not his father's old trading account, but a new one, blank, her own name lettered carefully on its first page in a hand she recognized as his.
I thought you might prefer to begin your own accounting in your own hand rather than inherit anyone else's, mine included, unless you chose it freely.
Cecily took the book and found she was smiling in a way that had nothing guarded left in it at all.
Then I had better choose with care what I write in it first.
She opened the ledger to its first page, and beneath her own name, in her own hand, wrote the date, and beneath the date, a single word she had not been permitted to mean in 8 long years of Sundays until this one, chosen. Cecily called on her aunt once more before the wedding, alone, without Simon, and found Prudence smaller in her chair than Cecily remembered her, the household keys no longer hanging at her waist. "I suppose you have come to gloat," Prudence said, not quite meeting her eyes.
I have come because you are still my father's family, whatever else is true, and I did not want to marry without saying so to your face at least once.
Prudence's hands twisted once in her lap, an old woman's gesture Cecily had never seen her make before. "I told myself every Sunday that I was teaching you not to hope for what you could not have," Prudence said. "Only Josiah's own accounting taught me otherwise. I had grown accustomed to deciding what you could not have, rather than asking whether it was true." It was not quite an apology, and Cecily did not require it to be one to accept that something honest had finally been said between them, after 8 years of Sundays that had offered her nothing but the same cold, well-worn lie. "I knew a woman once, in a village not unlike this one, named Hester Bramwell, who spent the better part of her youth believing herself a burden on kinder people's patience. It took her a stranger's honest arithmetic, much like Cecily's, to teach her the debt had always run the other way. If any of you have spent years being told you were owed nothing, only to learn the truth was kept from you rather than absent, I should like very much to hear it in the comments below." Cecily Sterling married the Duke of Harwick that autumn, in the same small parish church where a dead vicar's careful handwriting had first set her free. Reverend Yates read the register aloud one final time before the ceremony began, her father's old entry among them, and Cecily found she could hear her own name in that dead man's copperplate hand without any of the old ache attached to it at all. Only a quiet, settled gladness that the truth had finally caught up to where it belonged. She kept for the rest of her long life the habit of writing her own name first in every ledger she ever opened again, and never once, in all the years that followed, waited on a Sunday for anyone to tell her whether someone was coming for her.